Oh, this should be a lot of fun. Jets fans, get your football fingers afire, ready to blast away at me for no particular reason because you're mad and butthurt because I was right about your team again in 2014. The Jets were pretty much who I thought they were going to be in 2014, a dysfunctional mess. You had a lame duck coach. I thought he was a lame duck because there was no way he was going to be back for 2015. So a team that tried to overcompensate for their draft pick failures via free agency, and they rolled snake eyes, and they were just a mess. A mess. The 4-12 record proves it. And you know, when you look at the New York Jets, I've talked about it actually for a couple of years now here on YouTube about why the New York Jets are who the New York Jets are and why they are such a poorly run organization and why they are a standard of mediocrity to just flat out bad football in the NFL. And a lot of it comes down to the NFL draft. And look, the Jets have had some really nice picks over the years. Over the past 5 years in particular, guys like Muhammad Wilkerson and Sheldon Richardson and Quentin Coples and da-da-da. But they've had some big misses. You look at their 2010 class, that's pretty much a wash. Their second-round pick in 2012, Stephen Hill, was a complete and total bust. I was wrong about him too, frankly. You look at 2013, they had 2 first-round picks. The second one they spent was on Sheldon Richardson. That's good. But the first one they had, the 9th overall pick, they drafted D. Milner. That's bad. Just think about that. They spent a top 10 pick on D. Milner. And this was at a time where they traded away Darrelle Revis to get that 13th overall pick. So you could argue in a lot of ways, if you sat there and take Sheldon Richardson at 9, you basically traded Darrelle Revis for D. Milner. Exactly. But you look at it, there's more than that, too. You've got questions about Geno Smith and whether or not he's going to really establish himself as a starting caliber quarterback at the NFL level, their 2013 second-round pick. Then you look at their 2014 draft, several reaches, guys like Dexter McDougal and Jalen Saunders and Shaq Evans. And talk about, you know, even with, let's say, their second-round pick, Jason Morrow, he might be the best of the bunch, and he's not a lock, stock, star at this point. Calvin Pryor, the first-round pick, had moments, but he had some not-so-good moments, too. The biggest problem for the New York Jets, though, that I've talked about for a long time, is that since 2010, the year after they took Sanchez with the 5th overall pick, they made the big move up the board to get him. They decided the best way to help out that young quarterback was to draft defense in the first round every fucking year. And I've come on here for years and talked about the stupidity and insanity of this, and yet they continue to still do it. Some Jets fans are idiotic enough to think that this is ever going to change anything, and ultimately the results end up the same every year, and they're not good. 6 first-round picks. 6 of them between 2010 and 2014. Every single fucking one of them spent on defense with a defensive-minded head coach, and your damn defense still isn't elite. They're not even top 10 in the fucking league. And you look at 2010, Kyle Wilson. 2013, D. Milner. So they had some big bust. And the secondary. Holy shit. You trading away basically Darrelle Revis for a first-round pick. Yeah, it technically was Sheldon Richardson, but again, in a lot of ways, you can flip that and say it was like they were trading for Darrelle Revis for D. Milner. Holy Christ almighty. But all this time, your offense is doo-doo. All this time, your offense is terrible. All this time, you're trying to contend in a division with the New York Patriots, and you're rolling out there with a bunch of scrubs at the skill positions on the offensive side of the ball. And all the while, you're like in that Jerry Krause draft a power forward every fucking year mode if you're the Jets. Oh, it's another draft, another first round. Time to take another defensive player because that's the way to do it. No, it's not. Look at what you did. Kyle Wilson, then Muhammad Wilkerson, and then Quentin Coples, and then D. Milner and Sheldon Richardson. And then in 2014, you would think, oh my God, this team can't possibly be that ignorant to sit there and think that they have to take a defensive player. But knowing it's the fucking Jets, that's exactly what they're going to do. And that's exactly what the fuck they did. They took a safety in Calvin Pryor. They didn't even take, in a lot of ways, the best safety on the board. That might have been a ha-ha Quentin Dix. And there were other better players available on the board. I mean, holy Christ, they passed up on guys like Brandon Cooks. Holy Christ, they passed up on guys like Kelvin Benjamin. Do I need to proceed? This represents the stupidity of the New York Jets organization. Whether it's Mike Tannenbaum, the previous general manager, before John Idzik, the bean counter guy who was also in over his head as an incompetent general manager, the head coach Rex Ryan, just one big fucking mess. Everything that is wrong with the New York Jets comes down to their philosophy in the draft over the past 5 to 6 years, in my opinion. You drafted Mark Sanchez, and then you drafted first-round picks on the defensive side of the ball every year. And then you draft Geno Smith in the second round after having already taken 2 defensive players in the first round. Then you follow that up in 2014. Say, hey, the best way to help this young quarterback is to draft a safety. And your defense still needs work. Your defense is still a long ways from being elite. How ridiculous is that? That's the ridiculousness of the Jets. Now, with a new general manager and a new head coach coming in this offseason, and Mike Maccagnan and Todd Bowles, I wasn't surprised to see them be relatively active in free agency, because the one thing Idzik did do a good job of as a bean counter is he positioned the Jets very well to be able to take on some salary because they had a lot of salary cap room based off some of the maneuverings he made over the past couple of seasons. So you trade for Brandon Marshall, you get to sign Darrelle Revis and Antonio Cromartie and Buster Skrine, you bring in Stephen Ridley, you bring in James Carpenter. I mean, they spent some money in free agency. This is not usually the formula for success if you're an NFL team aspiring for greater things, because you're bringing in older guys, paying them off of past performance, not future production. But it's the Jets. You've got a new regime coming in, and it was so bad you need something, and you had money to spend. So we'll see how it goes. Now, in terms of the draft, you know damn good and well, more likely than not, the Jets are going to take a defensive player. The funny thing is after so many years of drafting a defensive player, they still have needs on the fucking defense. You have questions about whether or not Muhammad Wilkerson is going to resign long-term as he's in the last year of his deal. You have questions about the edge rushers because, frankly, after all of these years and all of these players on defense, you know, one thing Rex Ryan, John Idzik, or Mike Tenenbaum never really bothered to fucking do was draft an edge rusher. It's still a huge need for this defense. Maybe they wouldn't have to blitz to such extreme levels so often if they had more competent edge rushers on the outside in that 3-4. So at the 6th pick, it's very possible that the Jets will end up taking an edge rusher, making it the 7th first-round pick over the past 6 years that they spend on the defensive side of the ball. Now, don't get me wrong. The number one need for this organization, other than a clue, is a quarterback. I want to like Geno Smith, but after 2 years, he's been bad. And I most certainly wouldn't tie my future as a general manager or a head coach coming into a situation to a guy like Geno Smith. Fuck that shit. Their number one need as an organization is quarterback, period. If anybody tells you any differently, if anybody argues you any differently, then never listen to them ever again and revoke their football talking card forever because they are fucking morons. Quarterback is by far the number one need for the New York Jets. In a division where you still have Tom Brady, a division where, yes, you even have Ryan Tannehill, they're trotting out Geno Smith. And Geno occasionally has his moments, but at the end of the day, Geno's still Geno, and Geno does Geno things. And the Jets went 4-12 this past year. They need a quarterback in a bad, bad way. The problem is with the 6th overall pick, unless they move up and they, freaking mortgage the future, foreclose on the future, if you will, in terms of draft picks to try and move up to number 2 to get one, they're probably not going to get one. But that's okay because they do have other needs to fill on the offensive side. At the end of the day, we can sit here and talk and break down all these teams in terms of their needs and this and that. But let's face it. The Jets went 4-12. They sucked. No great surprise. They have needs every fucking where. You tell me a position on that team, and I show you a need one way or another. Why? Because they went 4-12 last year. Now, some certainly will say, well, not in the secondary. Perhaps, maybe not. But then again, Buster Skrine, you're talking about a slot corner. Maybe you'd have a long-term upgrade in the draft. How long is Antonio Cromartie going to be a number 2 guy? So there's a need. I could create a need anywhere for the Jets because, again, they went 4-12. They were terrible. Terrible. They have needs everywhere. Offensive line's a big need. They need help still at the skill positions, even with guys like Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker and Jason Morrow. They definitely need a better slot option. They could use another long-term replacement for Brandon Marshall. I mean, there are just needs all over the freaking place. When it comes to the philosophy for Mike Maccagnan and Todd Bowles and this New York Jets organization in this draft, there's a couple of things. First, to me, similar to the Washington Redskins, I think they need to be looking to acquire some additional draft pick currency. After so many years of incompetence in terms of draft philosophy and execution in drafts, the New York Jets still have needs all over the place. Don't fool yourself into thinking they don't. They lack young depth on both sides of the ball at all positions. In terms of philosophical focus, in terms of what they do in this draft, I think the focus must be on the offensive side of the ball. You fired a defensive-minded head coach to bring in another defensive-minded head coach. So you're trying to address the strength of your team with a guy geared towards the strength of your team. It's just not saying that that's a bad decision. However, you can't repeat the mistakes of the past. And as the Jets have done year in and year out during the Tannenbaum Rex Ryan or the Idzik Rex Ryan regime, they focused on defense, 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 and you saw what the fuck it got them. A doo-doo offense, an overrated, non-elite defense, and a 4-12 record in 2014. This team must have a philosophical approach of focusing on the offensive side of the ball in this draft, period, point blank. If they are able to trade down from, let's say, pick 6 to maybe pick 12 where Cleveland is, or pick 13 where New Orleans is, there are different options available, accumulating some draft pick currency, they could really look at addressing offensive line. Because, again, I think that's a huge need. Kershaw Ferguson isn't the youngest guy in the world. They brought in James Carpenter. I still think they're weak at guard. Even with Ferguson, they're weak at tackle. They could use help everywhere. Again, they were 4-12. This team must focus on the offensive side of the ball. At some point in time, yes, they're going to have to address edge rusher. I don't necessarily know that it has to be in round number 1, nor should it be in round number 1, because, again, this is a draft that is deep somewhat in terms of edge rushers, and I don't think edge rusher is the biggest need, even though it is a big need for the Jets, and drafting a defensive player in the first round represents that the more shit changes, the more shit stays exactly the same, and the more that this organization doesn't have a clue and doesn't learn from the mistakes of the past. You cannot sit there and continue to spend all these marquee picks on the defensive side of the ball just to sit there and have a doo-doo offense yet again and expect anything to ever be any different. I would fully expect with the new regime that they would understand that they must address offense early and often in this draft. They must look to fortify the trenches. They must look to get more athletic and more speed and skill on the outside. If they do that and they're able to find an edge rusher somewhere in the middle of the draft, then it might be a very good draft for the New York Jets, especially if they've been able to move down, maneuver well, which I would expect Maccagnan's going to want to do as general manager because he knows how bad the situation is. And he knows how desperately this team needs to acquire additional picks. And with where they're sitting in each round, they have the flexibility to be able to have some potential suitors to trade down with. So the New York Jets could be sitting in a position of power here, and they could do very well in this draft. I'm just saying, it's the fucking Jets. I guess only time will tell, but it is an important draft for the New York Jets. A new regime, and it's time for them to put the mistakes of the past behind them, not repeat them.